Hello, everybody. Welcome to 3 o'clock with SOC. We're so thankful for you all being here with us today. I just want to take a second to make sure that those that need access to the Spanish interpretation line can get onto it. Buenas tardes, feliz lunes. Muchísimas gracias por estar aquí con nosotros en otro foro comunitario hoy, que es un foro muy especial. Si ustedes quieren escuchar en español, lo puede hacer a través de nuestra línea de interpretación y lo puede acceder a través por marcar este número que aparece aquí en la pantalla. Hay que marcar 646-749-3122 y luego hay que poner el código de acceso que es 779-328-221. And we will share that in the comment section for anyone that needs that throughout the time as well. I also just want to remind folks that these videos will always be on our Facebook page and our YouTube page after the fact. So if you aren't able to be with us directly at 3 p.m., you can still watch these videos with the interviews with the amazing guests that we have after the fact as well. Just have to go to our Facebook page or our YouTube page. And then I also just want to encourage all types of engagement throughout this presentation. If you have questions, if you have comments, if you want anything clarified, that's what TR Williams is here to do. So I am going to bring her on right away. We're going to bring on TR Williams, who's the Deputy Director of External Affairs at the Office of Governor Evers. And she's going to give us a rundown of how things work at the state level in Wisconsin. So we're very thankful for her, and we'll bring her on.
Hello, welcome. Thank you, Gabe. Hola, bienvenidos.
Yes.
Good to be here.
Yes, no, thank you so much for coming on and giving us this great presentation that we know we're about to see. So I know you have a presentation for us, but do you want to just go ahead and introduce yourself first and tell us a little bit about your role?
Yes, definitely. So again, my name is TR Williams. Sometimes the way that I speak, people don't hear me clearly. So I always tell them it's T like tornado, R like roller coaster, not tiara like you would put on your head. And I currently serve as the Deputy Director of External Affairs in the Office of Governor Evers. A simple way of explaining that is that my job is about people. It's about making sure that the governor's office is in tune to the concerns of advocates, whether you call yourself an advocate or not, or you just consider yourself trying to live in your community and wanting a great life for you and your family. It also includes, larger organizations or lobbyists as well, but wanting to make sure we have a temperature on what's happening so that our policies are reflecting what we're hearing from people across the state. I am excited. Oh, go ahead. No, go ahead.
No, just thank you for the introduction. Yeah. And I do just want to say, too, that as you share your screen, because I know you're going to share your screen, I do just want to ask that people that are watching, if they haven't already, go ahead and fill out our sign-in sheet. Typically at SOC events, we would have a sign-in sheet that would help us, track who's at our events. And, we need that information for different records and reports that help us do things like this. And so if you wouldn't mind, those that are watching, please fill out that sign-in sheet that I just put in the comment section. Your information stays private, doesn't get shared with third parties or anything like that. So fill it out for me, please. But I did interrupt you. I'm sorry. So please continue.
No worries. That's the problem of being a former lawyer. We could just talk and talk. I am going to start sharing my screen now. Gabe was gracious enough to practice with me ahead of time, so I'm hoping it all works right. Gabe was also great at being available for questions, since I think once I start sharing my screen, I won't be able to see any comments. And so know that she and I have an agreement that she can interrupt me if folks have questions.
Awesome.
Good deal.
All right, so we see that now.
Okay.
And I am going to put it full screen so they won't see either of our faces, but they'll be able to hear both of us, okay?
Awesome. Sounds like a plan.
All righty. Take it away. And then if you do just want to click hide at the bottom there.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, then that'll help us see the full picture. Awesome. You are good to go.
Teamwork makes the dream work.
It
All
truly
right,
does.
so here it is. This is what I've titled How Wisconsin Government Works. It's just an overview of the civics process and some sort of advocacy best practices that I have found not only in working with the governor's office, but before I formally came to the governor's office, I worked for the Wisconsin Primary Healthcare Association, which is a professional association for all of the federally qualified health centers in the state of Wisconsin. There are 17 federally qualified health centers. There are 5 in Milwaukee specifically, Gerald Ignace, Progressive, Outreach, 16th Street Community Health Center, and Milwaukee Health Inc. And so when I was a healthcare lobbyist blocking and tackling on behalf of those community health centers, I was able to learn some few things from advocacy, as well as my participation in the Wisconsin Women's Network Policy Institute. So this is a combination of all of that experience that I'm sharing with you all. I have to always give the disclaimer that this presentation certainly has legal things in it, but it's general information. It's not specific legal advice. I have to also say that because although I am an attorney, I am not your attorney. And if you have very specific legal questions, you should certainly consult a qualified legal counsel. Got to get those ethics things out of the way so that we're all on the same page. So I like to start off before I get into how a bill becomes a law and all of the civics process and advocacy tips. I like to start off with just grounding us in the larger picture about what policy is. That word can be used in a lot of different ways. I used to say it's used with a small p policy and a big P policy. Small p policy can be like the rules that your mom or your grandma or your aunt or your father has in your household. That's the policy of those households. Big P policy could be meaning sort of what we typically think about as sort of democratic principles or Republican principles, like a political party principles and those policies that they may have. Policy can also talk about what a law enforcement agency would do, what a school will do. And so because there's all those varying ways in which we talk about policy, I included this part of the slide so that we can ground it a bit and you all can know what I mean when I'm using policy in this presentation. So the first thing I like to focus on is that policy is created, it's made, it's a construct, and it's created or constructed either in response to an issue or a problem that requires a solution. And so what's important to understand here is that because it's a construct, because it's made, it's by people, it's by individuals, right? Sometimes policy can seem like a very big, overwhelming thing to try to impact or influence, but reminding that it's a construction from folks who are making this up helps to ground it a bit. And I would also say that with me sharing this definition that it's a construct in response to an issue or a problem that requires a solution, know that those who are at the table constructing policy are the ones who are then creating the narrative of what's a problem, what's an issue, and what a solution looks like. And so as an advocate, as you're thinking about the different ways that you want to influence or impact policy, think about this construction, about who's at the table determining what's an issue or a problem, and then also thinking about, who's at the table determining what those solutions can be. Policy is also what the government chooses to do, actual action, or what they choose not to do, implied action about what this issue or problem that has been raised is. Policy can take the form of law, of regulation, or a set of laws and regulations that govern or look over or supervise whatever that problem or that issue is. Policy is also an ongoing process. It doesn't always have a clear beginning or an end. And as a former litigator in Milwaukee County in criminal defense law, that is part of one of the most frustrating things for me as I was shifting from the legal world into this policy advocacy space, is because I'm used to, we have facts of a case, we have the law, we apply the facts in the law, we argue that, there's a decision made by the judge or a jury, we have a conclusion, and that's it. But the beauty of policy, as well as the frustrating part of it, is that it's constantly beginning to be reassessed, revisited, and revised and evaluated. So it's really an ongoing process. So as an advocate, as you're trying to impact policy, you also want to be able to have an understanding of what the history of that policy is, where that policy is in its reassessment, revisiting, and revising, which is that ongoing process that we see happen. When we talk about who makes policy, the legislature certainly makes policy. And when I say legislature, I mean at the state level, that's the representative in the assembly, or the senator in the Senate, because in our structure here at the state and our structure at the federal level, we have two bodies of elected officials, the House or the Assembly and the Senate. And so that can be the legislature, but any body of local elected people can be considered a legislative or policymaking body. So that can be a school board, that can be the county supervisors, board of supervisors, that can be the city council or common council. Also, the executive branch makes policy. So at a city level, that's a mayor or an administrator or a village president at the city or like lower municipal level. At the state level, the executive is the governor. And at the federal level, the executive is the president. And the way that those executive branches make policy is they veto bills or sign bills. They propose a budget. And in the sense of the governor and mayor and the president, they also make appointments. And so they may assign or appoint people to certain positions. So for instance, the governor assigns a secretary to all the different agencies that we have in the state. And in Wisconsin, what I've added here is that the Department of Justice and the Department of Public Instruction are actually not places that the governor appoints. Those are elected positions. So the people collectively choose them. So even if we elect a new governor that may be of a particular political party, there is a candidate for the Department of Justice and the Department of Public Instruction. So the superintendent or the attorney general, those are those titles. Those are elected positions. When we look further down of who makes policies, I would also say departments and agencies of the government are part of policy making. For instance, the Department of Health Services, a lot of policies that may have started in the legislature as a piece of legislation eventually has to live somewhere. And it has to be housed somewhere in state government. And typically agencies are the places of where those policies are governed, and it's really how they administer a particular program, how they develop a program, how they implement the regulations behind that program. All of that monitoring, evaluation, study, and implementation of a program is a form of policy making. And so when we're looking at places where policy can be made, we have the legislature, we have the executive branch, but we also have state agencies. I would also include the judiciary in this who makes policy. That's the courts. Those are judges. Because ultimately, when a case is in front of a judge, whether it's criminal or civil, it's about money that's been lost or a crime that's been committed, that the way that a judge will decide on the facts of those cases with the law is a way that you create precedent. The same way with lawsuits. We've seen that a lot actually this past year with the different executive orders that the governor made for the COVID-19 pandemic, when it came to sheltering at home or when it came to, closing down businesses. There were a lot of lawsuits against the governor on whether or not he could do that with the powers that he had. And based on those decisions, the outcomes of those lawsuits, that creates a legal policy to say, hey, we have a precedent or a history that we vote this way or decide this way about this type of action. And so all of that is a form of policy. At the legislative level, the local electeds, at the executive level for departments and the judiciary. I like to pause here and actually talk a little bit more about what the legislature does. So those are the people that are elected, the assembly representatives or the senators in the Senate. Those are all different elected officials. Again, you can have some at the city level too. That includes common council or board of supervisors, but I'm talking about the state legislature in this part. What they do is they pass legislation and resolutions, and they set and approve budgets. So the governor proposes a budget, but it's the legislature who then sets and approves that budget, puts it in front of the governor for a signature or for a veto. And we'll talk more about that process later on. The legislature also holds hearings and other fact-finding activities, and they are intended to help their constituents with the problems and issues that they have. This is sort of a slide I included because there can be a lot of state agencies, and sometimes you use the term state agency or state department, but folks don't know who exactly that is and who that covers. And so this is the long list of the Wisconsin state agencies. And at the very bottom of the slide, I also have where you can find this online. Some of the ones that I deal most with in my job based on just the type of portfolio issues that I have as we split up different issues amongst the team and external affairs, Department of Health Services, Department of Children and Families, definitely Department of Administration, and Department of Natural Resources are just some of the few of the state agencies. This is just a visual of sort of that ongoing process that I talked about policy is in. So instead of thinking about it as a straight line across with a beginning or end, it's in this circle format. And we sort of start at identifying the problem. That's what I went back to when I defined policy as a construct, as a reaction or a response to an issue or a problem. First, you have to identify it. It's not a problem unless someone knows that it is, right? And I don't mean that in the sense that it's not real for you, but when you're talking about impacting policy, if you stubbed your toe on something and that really hurts you, that is a problem for you. But if you haven't talked to people about, hey, there's this rock in the middle of the road that I stubbed my toe on, and this is what's a problem, you have to, be able to call it out so that others are recognizing what that issue is. So it goes from just being your issue to being a larger problem. So that's identifying the problem and also raising the problem's profile, being able to get other people around the energy of what this problem may be or what this issue might be in order to make that change. And when you're looking at identifying the problem, that can be a number of different people. When you think about who does that, right? That's when I said, when you're talking about who's at the table, deciding what a problem is or deciding what that solution is, it can be different advocacy groups that identify those problems. It can be elected officials. It can be government agencies. It can be community members. Any folk who want to be able to live their life and are living their life that are experiencing those problems, they can be the ones to have that leadership moment and that power to identify a problem. When it comes to raising the problem's profile, same group of people are able to do that there. And as an example that I use sometimes to kind of make this make a little bit more sense is that you may have orange growers, right? Orange growers in Wisconsin who are super excited to sell their oranges at a farmer's market in Milwaukee on the first Saturday of the month. And so what they've, been preparing for and excited for in all the harvest is this farmer's market to sell their oranges. They realize that actually having the farmer's market on a Saturday really doesn't work well for them. It could be because of how long it takes for them to have to travel with their fresh oranges and wait till Saturday. So it could be a traffic thing. It could be a farmer thing of knowing when the best time to pick their oranges are. But however it's been worked out, the orange growers have decided that Saturday is a really bad day for the farmer's market to sell their oranges. So they've identified this problem. And now they need to raise the problem's profile. They need more than just the orange growers knowing that it's a problem. They have to tell someone who is in a position of power to help them. So not just power in general, but in a position of power to help them. And so this group of orange growers could team up with the Better Business Bureau of a city, or they could team up with the banana growers who also feel like farmers market on that first Saturday doesn't work for them. And maybe they first tell their city council, and the city council says, well, to, change this permit, we actually need to have a different zoning law, and that's actually at the state. Whatever it may be in the process, all of these advocacy groups or elected officials, government agencies, community members have the opportunity to identify the problem and raise the problem's profile. Then you go into developing a solution and getting that solution adopted, or getting folks to agree who have the power to impact this policy change to agree to that change in policy or change in the solution to this problem. And so maybe, the orange growers have everybody agreed and on the same page, and they decide, hey, all we need to do is actually change it to an earlier time on Saturday, and that actually would work for us. And so they get prepared to change it to a different time on Saturday morning. That way you don't have to worry about the same, maybe zoning permits, whatever the solution may be. And then they implement the policy. Next stage of this process, right? We're going to do it on Saturday. Now you have to get to evaluate the impact, because maybe now having that farmer's market on a Saturday has created a traffic issue. Maybe that's also this new time that it is on Saturday is also the same time that there is a local, soccer match that happens, or a really big conference that's happening in that area of where farmers market is at. So now you have a transportation issue. And so what was your first problem that you thought you found a solution to, and you implemented the change by moving the time up, has now created new problems. And then that's when you go back into this policy cyclical stage of then identifying what that new problem is, raising that profile, finding a solution. So that's sort of an example of what I mean about how this policy process can go around and it's constantly ongoing. So I'm going to pause there because I said a lot, and I just want to check with Gabe and see if there are any questions or comments that people have just on what I've said so far.
Yeah, so we've got a couple hellos in the comments. So hello to all of those who have given us a like or a thumbs up or just a hello in the comments, but no questions or comments specific to your presentation so far. But you are going to go into the process of making a bill into a law and what that looks like, right?
Yep, that's correct.
Okay, perfect. So go ahead and continue then.
All right, then. So I like to add in this quick reference here. This is just some things that I know that as people are joining, you may have different levels of comfort or knowledge with what I'm talking about. And so I like to just do a pause and a quick reference to just break down some things that I know I have in my head that I sort of assume when I'm giving this presentation, that I want to make sure that we're on the same page. And all of this information, this is my favorite site that I'm always on, legis.wi.gov, right? So legis, legis.wi.gov is where you can find all of this information. That's the legislative website for the state of Wisconsin. So in Wisconsin, we have 33 state senators, and they have 4-year terms. So remember, I said the way we've organized our government here in the state is much like at the federal level, where we have 2 bodies of electeds, a Senate and an Assembly. So in the Senate, there are 33 members and they serve 4 terms. In the Assembly, there are 99 members or representatives of the Assembly, and they serve 2-year terms. The most powerful, arguably, the most powerful positions in the Senate and in the Assembly is the title of the Speaker of the Assembly and the Leader of the Senate. Right now, the Speaker of the Assembly is Robin Vos. The Leader of the Senate is Devin LeMahieu. And the reason why I bring this up is because you may elect someone to represent you in their district. And then once they're in the legislature, they may get elected or chosen, voted for by their fellow colleagues to hold this other position of leadership. And in this case, a Speaker of the Assembly or the Leader of the Senate. They also may be elected to other leadership positions that the legislature has. But these 2 in particular are so important because the Speaker of the Assembly and the Leader of the Senate are the ones that are in charge of naming and deciding all the committees that the legislature has. Committees are a way that the legislature sort of breaks down all of the different problems and solutions to problems, policy or legislation that will come to them, because there will be tons that will happen. And so there's a committee for health, a committee for children. And a lot of times they're even more specific to that. It may be specific to juvenile justice or childcare or caregiving. And health may be specific to Medicaid program versus just health in general. And so the creation and the naming of the committees are all determined by the Speaker of the Assembly and the Leader of the Senate. So they name the committees, they choose the committees, and then those positions of leadership also decide who will be the chair of those committees. So which of those elected officials who you may have elected in office, but then this part you don't have anything to do with, is the Senate Speaker of the Assembly or Leader of the Senate who will say, well, this person is going to be the chair of the Health Committee, or this person is going to be the chair of the Juvenile Justice Committee. And they also decide which members from their political party will be on those committees. So there's a lot of power in those leadership roles. In Wisconsin, we also have the Joint Committee on Finance. Joint committee, most committees are based on the Assembly or the Senate. So all of the Assembly members have their committees. All of the Senate has theirs. This Joint Committee on Finance is unique, but because it combines members of the Assembly and members of the Senate. It's also unique to Wisconsin because in other states, budget and finance are separate, but our Joint Committee on Finance does both. So there are 16 members of this Joint Committee on Finance. You need 9 of those members to say yes or to vote affirmatively to get any piece of policy to pass out of that committee. And the Joint Committee on Finance, anytime there's money that's being spent, or the word is appropriation, the Joint Committee on Finance needs to hear about it, see about it, and has to go through them. So currently, the big sexy topic is the budget. We're in the midst of the budget process. The governor proposed the budget, and before it could go to the full Assembly or the full Senate, it had to first stop at the Joint Committee on Finance. And they have to approve each of those parts of the budget or remove each of those parts of the budget. In this case, on May 6th, the Joint Finance Committee removed about 388 items of what was in the governor's budget. Just to level set the language that I use when I say bill, that's also another word for policy. That's that proposed solution to a problem. That's a bill. That's the language that's used before it's signed by the governor. It's an act once it's signed by the governor and it now becomes a law. So it goes from a bill, which is a proposed solution to a problem, to an act, which is the law in effect of how to solve whatever that problem was, whatever that policy request was. I have to also mention here the Legislative Reference Bureau. They are actually the ones who take that solution to a problem, that policy proposal, and put it in the really big fancy language of a piece of legislation or a bill. The Legislative Reference Bureau is typically lawyers, not always. And I basically define them as translators. They are nonpartisan, so it doesn't mean there's Republican and Democratic Legislative Reference Bureau people. That means that they don't affiliate with a party, period, in their job. That is just about not being political in either way. They look at whatever that proposed solution is and translate that solution into bill language or statutory language, which is what you and I see if we were to click on a bill or look up a statute, all of that fancy language. That's the Legislative Reference Bureau. Here's some other terms that I'll be using as I get into the details of how a bill becomes a law that, again, I want to make sure we're all on the same page for. An amendment is a suggested change to a bill or another proposal of a solution to a problem that's been introduced to the legislature. Sometimes when people think of an amendment, they only think about taking something out, but an amendment can also be adding something in. It's an addition, a deletion, or substituting language in a proposed solution to a problem, in a bill, in a policy. An appropriation, I already mentioned really quickly, is anytime you're talking about spending money. So it's the legislative authorization of spending money, the legislative meaning the body of legislators, elected officials. The biennial budget, which I also referenced because we're currently in a budget time. The state of Wisconsin does their budget for a 2-year period, right? And most times you think 2 years as in January to December. In the state of Wisconsin, we use what's called a fiscal year. So when we talk about the beginning of the budget year, that actually starts July 1st of the odd year, and then it ends June 30th of the next odd year. So currently, the budget that the governor proposed and that the Joint Finance Committee is currently debating right now is the budget for what would be July 1st of 2021 until June 30th of 2023. That's the budget that we're talking about, which is why so much time goes into it, because it's in the budget for the next 2 years. So when you're talking about certain budget requests or trying to impact certain budget requests, this is this time window to do it now, because once we have our budget set, that's what it is. A bill, again, I said, is proposed changes is before it becomes a law. So it's that proposed solution to a problem. Bipartisan means it's representing two political parties or more, Republicans, Democrats, independents. Nonpartisan means that it's not based at all or influenced with or affiliated by any political parties. The term resolution is what you may see from a legislative body when they're trying to express their opinion or an intention of something. Resolution itself doesn't necessarily have the power of law. It can be a formal statement of an opinion or an intention to pass something, or an opinion or intention about a particular topic. A resolution on racism being a public health crisis, a statement of an opinion from a legislative body of what they believe. A veto is the action that is taken by the governor. In this example that I use, it could be done by the president as well, in part or completely to reject something that's been proposed as a solution to a problem. And then a veto override is when you have a dynamic where the legislature may present something to the governor, and then the governor may veto it, say no. And then there's an opportunity that it could go back to the legislature where they can override the governor's veto. But that requires a particular number of votes in both the Assembly and the Senate. We won't get too much into those details, but I did want to offer that as far as the words that I may be using when I go through the budget and the legislative process, so they were all on the same page. Pausing again here just to make sure there weren't any questions about those terms that I'm using before I get into how a bill becomes a law.
So not necessarily about terminology, but there is, or definitions, but there's a question, why is it important to have representatives that represent your interests in the Finance Committee?
That's a great question, because anytime there's going to be a policy change that spends money, the Finance Committee needs to hear about it and vote on it. So yes, say you are a grassroots advocate who has worked to raise an issue of a problem that is happening in your community. It could be the problem of folks who may be undocumented being able to have licenses so that they can drive to and from work. And you have really done the work to raise that problem's profile, to get others to sign on with you about this being a problem in order to get that energy around it. And you may even have found a legislator, your representative who wants to support changing a policy that can be IDs so that folks are not harassed and can be able to drive their cars without any other penalties, which will cost a lot of money for their family, which is sort of defeating the purpose of them trying to work hard in order to make money for their family if they're paying fees for not having, the right IDs. And so you get that energy, you get that, but it turns out that in order to do this, there may be, and I'm just throwing out a number, there may be a price tag of $1 million that has to be spent to do this because of the time that it takes to get this demographic of folks IDs, including in not only changing the policy and the rules, but also putting money behind this effort. Maybe some of the money of that $1 million price tag is also because you need to do advertisement about it. You need more than word of mouth if you want it to be effective. So you're going to have, commercials about it. And the state, if they're the ones that are taking on this work of being the ones to have these IDs, Department of Transportation may need to do, all of these advertisements about it so people can know how they can get their ID, where they can get their ID, and all of these details. So let's say it costs $1 million. So that means that that's going to have to go to the Joint Finance Committee. If the Joint Finance Committee, out of the 16 of them, that's Assembly and Senate members, vote that this is not something that they think they're going to do, then that legislation, the word that we use or the term that they use, has died at the Joint Finance Committee. It doesn't go outside of that Joint Finance Committee. Joint Finance Committee are the ones that make recommendations. Now, we'll get into later what advocates can do in response to that to try to revive it. But as the process goes, the Joint Finance Committee is an extremely powerful committee in the way that our government is formed and has a lot of decisions. Pausing to make sure that accurately answered that question or if there was any follow-up on that.
No, absolutely. Thank you for that response.
Yep. So I call this the Schoolhouse Rock remix. Depending on the ages of the people who are joining, you'll get that reference or not. It was a show back in the day about how a bill becomes a law. So this is my version of taking that information and putting it down, remixing a bridge. So really, really summarizing it into a very quick sort of 8 steps, right? The first step is that a bill is drafted. Again, when I use bill, that is the proposed solution to a problem. It hasn't become a law yet. It's just a proposal. It'll have the fancy language that the Legislative Reference Bureau wrote, but it's still that proposed solution to a problem. So the example I used earlier of orange growers, right? It's a drafted proposal. Let's change the farming market to, Sunday afternoons versus Saturday mornings because the orange growers, think it's better for them to be able to sell their oranges then. And they have all the support of the banana growers. They have all the support of maybe the families who normally have a soccer match on Saturday, and it makes it inconvenient because they don't want to choose between the soccer match and the farmer market. So they're all in support of this. So they've drafted this bill proposal. The bill is then assigned to either the Senate or the committee or the Assembly, right? Because we have 2 bodies in our government structure. So they say, okay, this proposed bill to change farmers market from Saturday morning to Sunday afternoons is going to start in the Senate. And most times the way that they assign, if it's the Senate or the Assembly, depends on which of the representatives authored the bill, right? So we know the Legislative Reference Bureau actually does the language, but any of those proposals have some representative or senator who is sort of taking responsibility or authoring this legislation. So if it's a senator, it'll start in the Senate first. If it's the Assembly, it'll start in the Assembly first. Sometimes they kind of are having parallel tracks. The bill is then referred to a committee. So there may be a committee in the Senate on orange growers specifically, or there may just be an assembly on, a committee on all fruits and vegetables and what we do with fruits and vegetables in the state of Wisconsin. Whatever the name of the committee is, which is determined by those 2 positions of power I told you about, the Speaker of the House, of the Assembly, or the Leader of the Senate, is referred to a committee. And then there's a hearing held on that bill, on that proposed solution. So that committee, so let's say it's the Committee of Fruits and Vegetables in Wisconsin, will then hold a public hearing. Those are typically done during the workday, and they're typically done in Madison, where the legislators physically come to work because of the Capitol. And then that's when folks can give their feelings about this proposed solution. They can register for it. They can register against it, or they can register their comments as for information only. Now, when we talk about the budget, these hearings are done a little bit differently because the budget is so big and so wide. These hearings that the Joint Finance Committee does are actually held across the state instead of just being, in Madison at the Capitol. And they're also held during more time strengths than just like during the day. They can be held in different hours, typically across the state. But I will say that if folks are not able to physically attend a hearing in order to share their thoughts of a proposed solution or a bill, the legislature does accept written comments from people. The committee after this hearing will then vote on the bill. So they'll vote, yes, we recommend moving this bill out of committee and sharing it with our colleagues in the full Senate or the full Assembly, or they'll vote it down. And that's what I said earlier is that dynamic or that term of it dying at committee. And I have to note that I'm saying these like they're going right behind each other, but there are times where step 1 through 2 happens really quickly. But steps 3, 4, and 5 may take a long time. And so they don't necessarily automatically happen quickly. It really depends on the energy at the legislative level around those senators or representatives to get things referred to a committee and scheduled for a hearing. So I should note that I can say it quicker than sometimes it actually happens in real life. Once the committee votes on that bill, so they say, yes, we want to move forward with this bill. Maybe they've made some changes in the bill as a committee. It's very important to know that they may make changes as a committee. And even though you as an advocate would have given your opinion and testified at a hearing or in writing about it, that if the committee makes an amendment, there's not really another time for you to jump in about your opinion about that amendment. So when it comes out of committee, even if it's a yes vote, the question is it yes in the same version that it was when I was for it, arguing for it or against it as a advocate, or has it changed? And sometimes the committee makes those amendments or changes based on what people have said at the public hearing. So someone may have said, the bill proposal, the solution of doing this, on doing the orange market on Sunday afternoons instead of Saturday mornings, can we just make it 2 p.m. instead of 1 p.m.? And maybe the committee heard enough people asking for that, so they pass it, yes, let's change the orange market from Saturday to Sunday, but instead of the original 1 o'clock, they changed it to 2 o'clock. And then that's what they'll then recommend to the full assembly or the full Senate. So the bill is then scheduled for what they call a floor vote to go to the full bodies, those 99 assembly members or those 33 senators, for them to vote on it, to hear about the bill. That is a process where people can certainly access watching it happen. So there are platforms that stream those on the floor sessions. Wisconsin Eye is a very popular one. So they're accessible to see, but I will note that is not a space where public comment is taken once it's made it to the floor. So the full assembly or the full Senate, depending on where the bill is at, will take a vote and they'll decide yes or no on that. And then the bill is sent to the opposite legislative body and the same process repeats. So if that bill for changing the farmers market of orange growers started in assembly, it'll have to go through steps 1 through 8. Well, not the drafting part, but at least the being referred to a committee and having a hearing and having the committee vote on it. It'll have to go through that same process in the opposite body, because whatever happens in the Senate needs to also happen in the assembly. And you can't get 2 bills that have different language. So there's this process called concurrence to make sure however it went through the Senate, however it went through the assembly is the same. If the Senate said, yeah, let's do 2 o'clock on Sunday, but the assembly said, let's do 3 o'clock, they got to make it right. You got to get it right so that both houses have approved the same level of, or the same proposed solution to this problem. Pausing there again, because that is also a lot of information, to check in on any questions or comments.
Yeah, so I'm sure you have more to say about them getting to the governor, but we did have a question that asked, how often are there veto overrides?
Each executive branch is a little bit different. I'm trying to think about all of state history. I can't think of any that happened in the last administration, the Walker administration, and he was in office for 8 years, 10 years. Was it 2 terms, 2 4-year terms? And a veto override has yet to happen in Governor Evers' administration. Part of that is typically veto overrides are based on political party. So all the Democrats are going to vote the same. All the Republicans are going to vote the same, typically. Sometimes you get a person who doesn't go with the party. But typically you're all voting the same. So a veto override means that you have enough votes. 2/3 is actually the magic number. 2/3 of those votes in each of those bodies, in the Assembly and the Senate, to vote against what the governor's veto was. And typically you don't have those numbers of political parties. So we just had an election in April. And there were actually before that, April. And there were a few new representatives who were elected to hold office. And some of the people who are really policy wonks really was keeping track on who was the Democrats and who was the Republicans being voted, because based on that, it could tip the number of the balance in the Senate or the Assembly, in which one could think there would be enough votes from one political party to possibly do an override. And so although the majority of our Senate and Assembly members are Republicans, so Republicans have the control in the sense of the number of members in the party, they haven't gotten to what the majority or super majority would be as enough of those votes in either houses to have that veto override without someone from an opposing party jumping in with them. They don't have it on just the numbers itself of party members. but I don't actually know in our state history how many times we've had a veto override. I'd have to look that up.
But yeah, definitely not common.
Yeah. Yes. Thanks, Gabe. Yeah, that's the short answer. Not common.
No, but I appreciate all of it. It goes to show how important the majority and how dangerous the majority can be depending on how you're looking at it, right?
Very true. Very true. So this next screen is just another visual way to look at my steps 1 through 8. I'm a very visual person, so I like to present it in different ways. So this is a step 1 through 8. This is sort of a flow chart way of it, right? And this has more than the 8 steps. This kind of shows all those details. So in this example, in this slide, I start with the assembly, because remember I told you there's the assembly and the Senate. So let's say our bill to change farmer market for the orange growers started in the assembly first, or also at the federal level, it's called the House, right? So the first step is that state representative, which is really the person from the lawyer from the Legislative Reference Bureau, is going to write up that proposed language, that bill, and they're going to get co-sponsors. I didn't mention this in the short version of this slide, but they'll get co-sponsors. So there may be one representative who you have gotten to really be on your side, who's willing to author and introduce to their colleagues, here's a proposed solution to a problem that I've been hearing. Here's the reasons why it's important. And then they can ask them before it even goes to a committee, I'm asking you to co-sponsor it, to sign on to it in its draft form before we even get to committees and voting, to show your support. And that can be a really great advocacy strategy moment. And advocates, even though you're not elected representatives, can certainly help with that co-sponsorship. There are some legislators I know who strategically won't introduce a certain proposed solution, a bill, unless they know they can get X amount of co-sponsors. Because their logic behind it is, if I get this many co-sponsors on it before it's even officially read into a committee and assigned to a committee, I'm already showing that there's this level of support for it. And typically, an elected official, if they authored or co-sponsored a bill, are not going to then reject it or vote against it later because their name is on it. It's part of their theme. So there can be a strategic move to get a lot of co-sponsors on a particular piece of legislation or a bill, and to do that from both sides of the aisle. And advocates can certainly be advocating for that. So outside of just advocating for getting a proposed solution, that's like, whew, at least we got the proposed solution. We got it on paper. The second step could be, I need to be calling these other representatives, even if they're not my personal representative, but they have a position of leadership. They may have a position on one of the committees that we think this will be assigned to. I can go around asking them, hey, sign on to this before it's even introduced to show your support for this piece of legislation, this proposed solution to a problem. So after it goes for that co-sponsorship, and it has the Legislative Reference Bureau on it, it won't have a bill number yet. It'll just be called LRB 123, because once it's introduced and it has its first reading, formally introduced to the body as its first reading, and then it gets assigned to a committee, it'll finally have a bill number. If it's in the assembly, it'll start with AB for assembly bill. If it's in the Senate, it'll start with an SB for Senate bill. And you want to make sure as an advocate, if you're looking up on that site I told you about, legis.wi.gov, you want to make sure you have the right year, because in 2019 and in 2020, there will be an AB1 because it was the first bill that was read in. But you want to have the right year because it can mean it's a different issue altogether, a different bill altogether. Once it's assigned to that assembly committee, like I share with you, it has a public hearing where the legislative body is looking for a public comment on it that you can do in writing or orally. After it's been assigned to that committee and has that public hearing, the committee can make amendments or take executive action. Executive action is just the reference to the committee making a decision amongst themselves. It's not public. So they'll do a day of public hearings, and sometimes they're only set for an hour, but they go 5 hours. Or sometimes they are set to start at 1 o'clock, but then they don't start till 3 o'clock. So in addition to them happening during the workday, and in Madison, typically, there's also the fact that they can be a little bit unpredictable based on schedules. But executive action is just that committee, after they've had that public hearing, it's a decision. We're going to make this amendment. We're going to change the, farmers market not only to Sunday, but instead of 1:00 like it was initially proposed, 2:00. That's an executive action that they took. And then the committee will make a recommendation. They will say, we members of the committee of the Fruits and Vegetables Committee of the state of Wisconsin have heard the legislation of AB 1 about the orange growers proposing to change the farmer market's day, and we recommend to the rest of the assembly that you should pass this bill with the amendments or the changes, the additions, the subtractions we've made. And if it has any dollar amount, if it's spending any money, if it says, it needs $500,000 just for, the statewide publicity on letting people know that this has changed, or it's a cost in transportation somehow that the state has to take. If it has any spending money, it'll have to go to the Joint Committee on Finance. If it doesn't spend any money, then it goes to the assembly rules, which is just making sure that what they did in the amendments and change can actually be done statutorily. And then it goes for a second reading with those amendments, with those changes done, so that people can hear those amendments and know that there's been changes. They don't think that what they initially signed on to is the same thing. There's debates about these changes. All of this is happening, though, amongst the legislative body. You can, again, publicly see it, like if Wisconsin Eye posted, but it doesn't have the public commentary in it. They're not involved in these debates and amendments. However, as an advocate, when you are watching a bill, which you can follow it and where it's at in the process on legis.wi.gov, as an advocate, as you're watching this bill unfold, you can still be talking to those legislators about what you think about those amendments and maybe some unintended consequences to those amendments, or why you support those amendments. Because as they are debating those amendments and eventually going to vote on it, your voice can be brought into the room through your advocacy to them, even though you don't necessarily have a role in that room as they're debating those amendments and those changes. It has a final third reading once the debate for those amendments have happened. There's an engrossment process. It's making sure that there aren't any technical corrections that need to be made, that the writing of it is consistent, and that it can actually be done as is. And then they'll vote on it. The full assembly will vote on it. Yes or no. The majority of votes wins, and it'll be passed. If the majority votes don't have there, then that term is used, that it dies at that point. If it does pass, the assembly will say to the Senate, hey, we've passed this, and now it's on you all to do. And then it goes through the Senate, and this is the exact same process that it'll go through the Senate, with each of those parts of a first reading being assigned to a committee. And I will know that the committees in the Senate and the Assembly sometimes are different. So while it might have gone to the Committee of Fruits and Vegetables in Wisconsin in the Assembly, in the Senate, it might go to the Committee on farmers markets, because they have a very specific committee like that. So it's not always the same. So as an advocate, that's part of the reason why you want to watch your policy topic that you're concerned of and see where it goes in both houses. The point I'll mention here is the concurrence. That's just what I said earlier about the bill has to pass out of both houses with a positive yes vote, a majority yes vote, and it has to be in identical form. They can't be different and expect that to go in front of the governor to be signed as a law. But once it has done that concurrence process and they're the same, the Senate would message it to the Assembly if it started in the Senate, but both houses will know that it's done. Once it's been covered by both houses, that goes through this enrollment process, meaning that all the amendments are consolidated and is prepared to go to the governor for his or her signature. Currently, our governor is a he, or identifies as a he. And so the governor will look at the bill without a signature, and the governor has to act on that bill within 6 days. Right? So the governor can call for a bill saying, hey, legislature, I heard that you all finished on this, send me that bill. Or the legislature can send the governor a bill. And there's politics of whether the governor calls for it or whether it's sent to him. And sometimes there's a rush of who does it first, because once he has it, there is a 6-day window that he has to act on it. He either has to sign it or veto it within 6 days, which means the governor's team which we do have a legislative team, has to be following those bills, and there are tons of them, as you can imagine, and also has to be ready once the bill has gone through those different amendments, ready to really look at the bill in its current form to know if we're going to sign it or not, because we have 6 days that we have to act on it. The Secretary of State will then publish that or go through a publication of what that bill so the public can see it. You can see it on legis.wi.gov. If it's approved by the governor with his signature, the day that he signs it is the date of enactment. The secretary will then again publish that with the signature. That has to happen 1 day after enactment. So 1 day after the governor signs it. If there's a veto in whole or in part, then it has to go back to the Assembly and the Senate. And by whole or in part, I mean that when there is spending, if there's any money spent, just like it has to go to the Joint Finance Committee, when money is spent in a bill, the governor has the opportunity to do partial vetoes, to say, I just want to say no to these parts. If it's not spending money, and yes, say the example that I gave, for instance, for voter IDs or just identification for driving, regardless of what your immigration status is, if that didn't require any money from the state, if it was just that policy, and if there was an amendment that was made that also required, a registration of everybody of what their legal status was. And so the governor wanted to veto it because he didn't like that part. Because if it didn't spend any money, he would have to veto all of it, even the good part of allowing these IDs to happen, because of that last piece of, maybe the governor's position is we don't want to be tracking people that way and knowing what their status is and having them have to register this way. I don't want that part, but then he wouldn't have the option of taking the good or the bad. They strategically call that a poison pill, where there's particularly amendment made to a policy that puts the governor in a position to have to make a hard decision of, do you take the good with the bad? Because if it didn't spend the money, then you don't have the opportunity to line item or just veto the parts of it that you don't like. The budget is the biggest example of spending money and having the opportunity to line item or partially veto. But sometimes outside of the budget, there are things that are brought to the governor that spends money where he could still have that option. But mostly it's the budget. And most times when it's non-spending, it's just an either or. You veto it or you pass it in the form that it was given to you. And then I shared there that if there's no objections and there's no vetoes, then it's passed and it becomes law with the governor's signature and its enactment.
I just want to do a time check with you. So it is 3:57. So just in case you have a 4 p.m. or something like that, but we're happy to continue until the end of the presentation. Just wanted to give you that heads up.
Thank you. I appreciate that. That's where I was pausing for questions. Are there any in the chat there, Gabe?
Not from that last section, no.
Okay, good deal. And so then this is the last part that I had for you all. This is just the biennial budget process. So the budget process is just like any other bill. When I gave those steps 1 through 8 of a proposed solution to a problem, the budget is basically a bill. It's just much larger, much sexier, and it has more energy around it, more media attention around it, because it's spending a lot of money and it's set for the 2 years of how our state is going to spend money, borrow money, and take money, meaning taxes. So money we bring in, the money we spend, the money we borrow. That's ultimately how the budget is segmented. And that is a huge process. And so that gets a lot of attention, but it doesn't really change those steps 1 through 8 that I went through. What I do want to point out, though, is that the budget process does start a little bit earlier than I think people realize. And there's places where advocates could then look to influence policy in those different places. So September 15th of the even year is when state agencies have to submit their proposed budget to the governor. And they do that via the state budget office, which falls under the Department of Administration. So September 15th of 2020 was when agencies were submitting their budget. And so if an advocate wanted to be particularly impactful, it doesn't mean you don't try to work with the system later, but you could certainly work with an agency, for instance, the Department of Transportation, about your issue of, changing the way that orange growers have their farmers market, or whether or not it's IDs for folks who've had varying levels of immigration statuses. You could be working with that actual department or agency so that your request, your advocacy issue, is already included in their budget proposal that they give to the governor. And that happens in the even year, September of the even year, before we even get into the budget. By November 20th of the even year, the DOA secretary is going to provide the governor or the governor-elect, if we just had an election, and every member of the legislature with the total amounts of the agency's budget requests. So not the details, but just the big numbers. And then the last Tuesday in January of the odd year, so this would have been the last Tuesday in January of 2021, is when the governor delivers his biennial budget message, where he puts in, "This is my proposed budget." And what isn't in here, because it's not required by statute, but what this governor did is, in between November and January, he had several budget listening sessions so that the public had a platform. They were invited to give him feedback on what should be in the budget. Sometimes that doesn't happen from governors, but know that as an advocate, you can still be contacting those agencies or those offices to make those requests. And actually, the governor asked for an extension, so he didn't actually deliver his budget message until February 16th of this year, not January. So as long as the the legislator gives him the extension, he can do the extension, and it cannot be the last Tuesday in January. Then in late February or early March of the odd year of 2021, that's when the Joint Finance Committee holds agency briefings. These are open to the public, but public can't comment. So this is when the Joint Finance Committee says, okay, Department of Health Services, Department of Children and Families, Department of Transportation, we got the big numbers back in November of what money you wanted to spend. Come sit down with us in this public session and let us ask you very specific questions about the money you're saying you want to run your agency and why you're asking for this money. Then mid to late March or April of the odd year, the Joint Finance Committee will hold public hearings throughout the state. That is required by the statute. And so that's what they actually did it in early April in different places around the state. One was virtual. The Joint Finance Committee, separate from the governor, held their own public hearings to hear people's feedback of the budget. And then April to June of the odd year, so the time we're in right now, the Joint Finance Committee begins to vote on all those pieces of the budget. That's that executive action. And they pull things out, add things, and change it. The legislator has told us that they're planning on completing that process. I think by the end of this week or by the 17th, end of this week is what they're saying they'll have it done. After they have finished doing that as the Joint Finance Committee is when they send it to the full Assembly and the full Senate for those legislators to then look at the decisions that the Joint Finance Committee has made, and they can choose at that time to amend what the Joint Finance Committee has recommended and done to the budget. It's a more difficult process, but it can happen. Then there's a conference committee, again, to make sure the Assembly and the Senate, both houses, has the same one. And then the budget is sent to the governor. He calls for the budget, and it'll be the governor's then on him to either veto it or pass it. And then again, just like I explained earlier, he can do partial or line item vetoes. And then there's the possibility, if there's enough votes, for the legislature to try to do an override. This statement here was just me reminding you that there are things that spend money, that are fiscal bills that don't happen during the budget cycle, that do happen. So it's not like all spending has to happen now or we won't spend at all through the rest of the year. It's just that typically, especially when you're talking about large spending, the budget process is the most ideal time to have that done. And I will stop there because I know that we're at 4:03 and take any questions that folks might have.
Yeah, so no more questions have shown up.
Okay.
And if you want to talk just briefly about advocacy, we would love to still include that, even though we are over time, if you're able.
I am able. Yep. And I apologize for that. I actually thought that I had a little, I don't know why I thought it was an hour 15. So I apologize, Gabe. So I was like,
No, don't apologize. We've loved all of the information. It's been very informative, truly.
good deal. So I will go through very quickly is I consider advocacy to be a spectrum. Sometimes the word can intimidate people like policy, or people are like, I don't know if I'm all about that as an advocate. I just have things that I care about and I want to change them. But there's really a spectrum of advocacy. And so you can be an advocate with a buffet of options, as I like to put it. So the ones that people mostly understand is this green box here, legislative advocacy, which typically is lobbying. So that's when you're going in front of a person who has the decision, or a body who has a decision to make change, saying, I want you to vote this way, or I want you to vote that way on this proposed solution, right? I want you to vote yes to AB1 of the orange growers to change the farmers market to Sunday at 1 p.m., right? And that legislative or lobbying type advocacy can be direct, whereas you going to that position of power, that person of power, or that legislative body. Or it can be grassroots lobbying, where you're encouraging other people to go to their legislators. And sometimes you're doing both. But I just want to bring out that there's that difference. You can encourage other people to talk to their elected officials. You can talk to your elected official. That's all under that lobbying type of advocacy. But then what I have here in the red box is also educational advocacy. And that's really you meeting with, calling, emailing, any general communications that you do with legislators or other decision makers about what this bill will or will not do, how it will impact the community. And if you are a business owner, if you are a caseworker, if you are a clinician or a provider of health, mental health, whatever your way that you show up in your community, if you're a parent, you may have very unique information that legislator needs to know in making those decisions. Because understand that legislators are regular people. And they've had jobs before they came into this position. And they're not necessarily experts on everything that'll come before them in order to decide on to them. So this educational advocacy piece, and you as a unique position of who you are in your community and the unique information you have, they need to hear from you on that. I always use this example. Senator Pat Testin is a Republican, and me and him get along very well when I was a policy advocate. But I always joke, and I've said it to him too, in my first year his first year, was it his first or his second year of being in the Senate, he was the chair of the health committee. His background was as a wine seller, right? And so it doesn't mean he doesn't have the leadership skills, but when it came to the work that I was doing with him and the relationship we were building when I was an advocate, a lot of the educational advocacy was important because that wasn't necessarily a field that he was in before he became into the legislature and before he was appointed to this committee. I've already gone to what that legislative advocacy is and the direct lobbying versus grassroots lobbying. I get sometimes a 501c3s when like, can they advocate? We can't advocate because it's lobbying and it's a conflict of interest, but you can advocate. If you're in that educational advocacy or grassroots advocacy space, you certainly can advocate. Organizing other people, educating legislators, educating the public, all of those things, researching issues and then sharing the results of your research, or what sometimes people call white papers or letters or a brief. All of those things are fair game for 501c3s that don't conflict at all with you being able to advocate, including you just doing information and advocacy around non-voter or nonpartisan voter education. And then I just kind of gave those policy stages again, and I just showed where these different types of advocacies can exist. So when it comes to identifying a problem and raising a problem's profile, all of that is educational advocacy. That's not saying vote this way or that way. That's like, hey, this is this thing happening in your community, Representative or Senator X, Y, and Z. When you get into developing a solution and getting it adopted, that is a little bit more legislative advocacy, the direct or the grassroots. But when it comes to implementing it, okay, so now we found this solution. Who are the organizations that we need to let know that we've now changed this farmers market? Those are going to be grassroots advocates, nonprofit leaders, community leaders, pastors at churches, directors of Boys and Girls Club, who actually have those community connections that are doing that educational advocacy piece. when it comes to implementing the policy. And they're also going to be the ones to be like, hey, I know we thought this was a good idea, but this is actually a problem that this has created. And they can share that assessment of the impact and help to identify if there are new problems in there. And then I'll end on this because I always like to share this story. And so I say it as in, I was in Kenya when I heard this story. It doesn't make it a Kenyan or an African proverb, but I happened to be in the country of Kenya in the continent of Africa when I heard this story. So the way the story goes is that, as we know in the animal kingdom, the lioness is the one who actually does the hunting for the pride. Sometimes when the prey has been really scarce, they haven't eaten in a while, it's just been a hard time at hunting. Sometimes lionesses will bring a lion, a male lion with them on a hunt. And this lion will be big, as most lions are larger physically than lionesses. Typically, this lion will have a huge mane and a very intimidating roar. Huge lion, huge mange, huge roar, but no teeth. And so the lionesses will bring that lion on the hunt with them. They'll have the lion sort of, once they found the prey and exactly where they want to hunt, they'll have the lion on one end of where that prey is at, and the lionesses will be on the opposite end of where they see this prey. And in some, magical way that the animal kingdom knows how to work, at just the right time, the male lion on the opposite side will let out his most intimidating, largest, hugest roar into the space. Mind you, he has no teeth. And so the prey, being very logical, very reasonable, hears the roar from the lion. And where do they run? In the opposite direction of where they perceive danger to be. And as they're running away from the huge lion with the big mane and the huge roar and no teeth, they run right into where the lionesses are ready to jump on their prey, who have tons of teeth. And so the reason why I share this story is because as you are looking at advocacy, as you are looking at those issues that matter to you, that you care about, that impact your family, there can be fear at times of running towards that roar, of running where that opposition may be, of running towards where you think you're going to get pushback or you're not going to be well received or where there may be negativity. But at times, running towards that place that you think is the place of danger can actually be where you can get the most done at, can actually be what is saving you versus running into the opposite direction. And I will stop there, Gabe, because you all have been extremely gracious with your time.
No, thank you so very much. All of that was so useful, and truly you explained it in a way that I think people could really comprehend. And that doesn't happen every day. So we are very appreciative of your time, of your explanations, your analogies. I loved that lion story. Run straight to the roar. I'm here for it. Love it. Yep. But yeah, we've got some thank yous for you in the comments. I, again, just want to extend the biggest thank you for taking this time out to be with us today and explaining this very complicated process in a number of ways to us. And that we'll have this to reference in the future as well. That really is going to be impactful for us.
Yes, definitely. It is my pleasure. I love doing this. I love SOC. And so SOC is what's up.
Thank you. We always appreciate a good shout out. But again, thank you. And if there are any follow-up questions that we weren't able to answer, we will definitely be in contact with you and look forward to future webinars like this.
Good deal.
All right. You have a great day.
Same to you, Gabe. Thank you all. Have a good one.
Bye-bye. Again, extremely thankful to T.R. Williams for being with us to explain all of that about the Wisconsin government, what happens at the legislative level, what happens in the budget process, how you can be an advocate for things that matter to you at that level, at the state level, right? So if you're just tuning in, if you missed some of it, if it was just a lot of information, I definitely encourage you to rewatch this because there was a ton of great info in there for everybody to help understand the different processes at the state level. And again, these interviews always stay on our Facebook and YouTube page so you can watch them whenever is convenient for you. And again, there's tons of information in the comments as well. She mentioned a number of different committees and positions and processes that Alam did an amazing job of adding links for if you want to reference them more specifically. And then again, please, if you are watching and you didn't already, please go ahead and fill out the sign-in sheet that we have linked in there, because it'll help us with our records and our reports for the people that help fund this kind of work and this kind of information that we're able to bring you all. But other than that, thank you for being troopers and staying with us until 4:15 here. And I hope you all have a great rest of the day. Thank you so much.